To finish up Numbers this evening. What evening? Good grief! I'm not going to get anywhere this way. Hoping to finish up Numbers this morning. Numbers, if you'll recall from our workbook, he doesn't spend much time with this section at all. And I wanted to spend some time with it, just a little bit. There's some stories here as Moses' life is wrapping up that I think it helps us to think about him as a person. I just wanted to spend some time with it. And you can remember back just a few chapters ago where God is telling him of his punishment, that he's not going to be able to enter the promised land. We know we've talked a good bit about that. And so where we're picking up this morning in verse 12 is God telling Moses that he is going to go and die on the mountain. He'll be able to see the promised land, but he won't be able to enter in. And so this is the exchange that happens around that. So we'll pick up with that and remember, some of the dynamics that have happened to this point. Obviously, Miriam passed away. In the same chapter, we had Aaron passing away based on the date that we saw, and we'll see it in our reading today as we pass by in chapter 33, verse 38. Jane pointed out that Aaron was 40 years old, Aaron passed away in the 40th year from the time they left Egypt, which means that not much time has passed. From the time that Aaron has passed to now when Moses is going to pass, not much time has elapsed. And so all of these emotions are very fresh. You can imagine Moses knowing that his life is coming to an end, knowing that his time leading the people obviously coming to an end. I would imagine he would be very emotional. We didn't talk a lot about it. I'll just mention it again. But the first part of chapter 27 was this case where you have these daughters coming to Moses and talking about how their father died. He had no son, and they're asking about their inheritance. You can see that picked back up in chapter 36, where again the solution is come to in the beginning of 27 and then revisited at the end of 36. The thing that stood out to me as far as our study of Moses is what you see so very often in verse 5. Moses takes their case to the Lord. And then in verse 11, Moses does all that the Lord commanded him. You just see that. You kind of point to that as a reoccurring pattern where he is seeking the Lord's counsel and he's doing all that the Lord commands. So that's a beautiful pattern to see. Other than that, I wasn't going to spend much time on that. So picking up in verse 12, God tells him the mountain that he's going to go up, where he'll be able to see the land. You'll be gathered to your people just as Aaron was. And, we talked about that scene where Aaron had his priestly garments stripped and put on his son. The mantle was passed. It feels like a very cold kind of a thing. It seems like it would be extremely emotional. And Moses had just seen that. He had just dealt with that. And so now this is what is going to befall him. And you see, well, as you're scanning there, as you're looking at that, what is on Moses' mind at this point? What does he ask the Lord? Because, again, in that emotional moment, you could imagine him, asking, hey, give me a little bit more time, give me another chance. What is on his mind? What does he ask for?
What's going to take over
Leadership.
What's going to happen to him?
What's going to happen to people? Yes, sir. Yeah, I do think that's awesome to consider. You see so very often where people, in their selfishness, even Bible characters and selfishness, are looking to their own designs, to their own situation. And here Moses, knowing that he's almost done with his walk, is only worried. He is primarily worried about the people. That's what's on his mind. And again, that's a beautiful thing. That's an awesome thing to consider. I think that should be a place where all of us are trying to get to mentally, where we're not worried about ourselves. If the Lord calls us home, if we're going through XYZ, difficult times, if we can learn not to think about what we're dealing with and try to think about other people, the glory of the Lord, that's such a great thing. Yes, sir.
Well, I think it's one of the ways. Number one, it talks about Moses, how humble he is. Secondly, here, like my situation, if I were Moses and I knew that I was in a condition that I wasn't saved, I think I'd be begging for mercy. You don't see that here, do you?
No, sir.
And I don't know if I'm reading too much into it. I don't know. I just know that we know, I think through the New Testament, the Mount Transfiguration, we see Moses is in I think, a saved condition. So apparently he knew, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That makes sense. He knew he was about to die, and he knew that he was preparing to be with the Lord.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. And I don't think you're reading too much in. I think it was Hezekiah, isn't it, who is told about all the evil that's going to befall the nation. And he's like, oh, okay, well, when is it going to happen? And he's told, it's going to happen so many years from now. It's like, well, at least it's not in my lifetime. You know, like, wow, really? That's your reaction? To me, this is such a great example. I don't get too personal, but you know, my father right now dealing with the cancer diagnosis that he has, and obviously we don't know yet what's coming from that, but anything could come from it. You know, he may get 6 months to live diagnosis, and he's not stressing. He's not letting that affect his day to day. He's thinking about others. He's thinking about what he can do for other people, and you see that. It's such a great example for us. That's what we need to see from this is getting to a place where we're not worried about ourselves. We're not worried if, you know, obviously God knows, and to Darren's point, you know, whatever God sees fit to do for us and with us, we'll be content with that. What about others? What can I do for others? And the book, I was catching up with the book a little bit. When you get to Deuteronomy, this point is the point to carry through with you into Deuteronomy. That whole book is him thinking about what's going to happen next. How can I get this next generation ready? I mean, he knows he's basically on his deathbed. You know, the scriptures point out he's not dying from weakness. He's not dying from his body breaking down. He's dying because he sinned. He's dying because God is going to take him. But so he knows his time is almost up, but he's not worried about himself. He's worried about preparing that next generation. And that from here on, as we go through Deuteronomy, I think that's one of the main points we need to keep in our minds.
He's not threatening everything he knows he has no control over.
Yeah, we looked at that verse last week where Moses is retelling the story, and he basically tells from God's side of it, God told him, stop asking, you know, just deal with the situation. And that's what he does. All right, so he asked for leadership. That was the word Steve used. He asked for leadership for the people. Appoint a man over the congregation, verse 16, who can go out before them, give them leadership so they won't be like sheep without a shepherd, verse 17. And God points to Joshua. How old is Joshua at this point?
Probably in his 60s or 70s.
He's got to be minimum 60. Minimum.
We know he was over 20.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
he wouldn't have been an exception.
That's right. When he was one of the original 12 spies, had to be over 20 because he was mentioned as an exception to all who are over 20.
Most people probably put him somewhere in his 30s.
That would be a good guess. 70.
I mean, put him in his 30s at
that time.
That's a spot.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Caleb had mentioned that he was, I think, 80, picture when he takes the land, when he takes, so we're close to taking the land, he's, 70s.
Yeah, definitely would imagine 70s, 80s makes a lot of sense to me. A little bit of speculation there, but I guess my thought off of that would be not a young man, not a super young man. Of course, Moses was how old when he started going back to Egypt to lead the people out? He was 80, so very similar. But regardless, you see at the end of this chapter, Moses doing all that the Lord commanded in verse 22, and lays his hands on him and commissions him as the Lord had directed. So This is Joshua basically being anointed to take Moses' place. I guess I should have clicked forward past that, sorry. All right, so we're not really going to talk much about the census, not really planning to talk much about the offerings and the feasts, and even the vows. There's a whole chapter there about how to deal with vows that people make. Specifically, the vows that women made were treated differently. I think it'd be interesting to study that, but not for the purpose of this class necessarily. But again, you just see the Lord communicating through Moses, Moses communicating to the people the will of the Lord at that time. So if anybody has comments about some of that, feel free to jump in. I did want to spend a little bit of time on chapter 31. So any comments or questions leading up to chapter 31? Excuse me. All right, so chapter 31, just the entire chapter is dealing with the Israelites, their vengeance on Midian, their warring against them. Why does God order this? Because this is ordered by the Lord. This is something He commands. And we saw as they're coming up this side, they specifically avoid Edom. When they get to the land of the Ammonites, they have a couple battles. One because the people wouldn't allow them to pass, and then one because the people were trying to frustrate them, I guess. What is the reason for this battle?
Goes back to the corruption Midian did at the urging, at the advice of Balaam.
Yes.
They had sent women in to corrupt.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. So it is in reaction to what happened with back in chapter 22 to 25, Balak, Balaam, and the Baal, specifically chapter 25, where Moab encouraged Midian to tempt Israel to sin, and it worked. They were drawn into sin, and you had the whole chapter there where they had to be purified. You see Phinehas stepping up there. We talked about last week, purging the leaven from their number, purging the wickedness from their number. But at that time, if you go back and read chapter 25, God told them, we're going to have to do something about this. And that's this. That is this chapter. They're doing something about it. So they go and they war. And of course, he points out we're taking 1,000 men from each tribe, verse 4. So they have 12,000. And they win. They win the battle. You can see down in there, not a single man is lost. They just decimate Midian. Not a single man lost. It's amazing victory. Some interesting details in there. What are in the casualty, the list of casualties on Midian's side? There's one name that really stands out. Balaam. Now the kings, we don't know the kings. They would have meant something to those people, but Balaam is killed in this. He was the one the New Testament describes who loved the wages of unrighteousness. If you take that New Testament label, a man who loved the wages of unrighteousness, and you go back and you read chapter 22, 3, 4, it all makes sense. That was Balaam's problem. He loved the wages of unrighteousness, and this was the price. This was the price. He ends up getting caught up in the judgment of the wicked people that God had determined, which is really a shame. I mean, Balaam was a prophet of the Lord. Balaam was speaking for the Lord, and yet he makes this decision to try to frustrate God's people, a people that he knew God was trying to bless. He stands directly in opposition of the Lord, trying to benefit himself, and this is what comes of it. So it makes an interesting case study to think about that and making sure that we're never putting ourselves against the Lord. Make sure that we're never standing up against the Lord's purposes. All right, so in all of this, Moses ends up getting angry down in verse 14. Why is Moses angry? I mean, we were doing what the Lord said to do. We have this great victory. And now Moses is just angry about it. Why? Why is he upset?
Left the women alive.
They left the women alive. That's right.
And think about the way in which Balaam had suggested that they can corrupt the people.
Yes, yes. I think that would be confusing if we didn't have the backstory that the problem from chapter 25 was that Midian had sent the women to Israel to tempt them. That was all part of the temptation, was to try to corrupt them with immorality. And so when they go to execute God's judgment, they let the women live, which, if you see verse 7, it specifically says they killed every male. We don't really know if God had specifically told them not to save the women, specifically told them to kill the women. We're not given that information, so we could assume maybe he didn't specifically say that, so left it up to them. But this is something that immediately stood out to Moses. It immediately stood out to Moses. You can see verse 16. These on Balaam's advice cursed the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor. So this was the reason. This is part of the problem. And in Moses' eyes, that they should have been part of the casualty. They should have been part of the judgment upon Midian. So what is the solution then? What do they end up doing? Okay, all right. So if they were not, they were killed. If they were, then they were given an opportunity then to become a part of the nation, to be assimilated in. So it seems cruel. Whenever you read about war in the Old Testament and we look at it through our modern lens, it just seems so cruel. And I think, you have to understand part of what God is doing He's taken his people out of, a completely pagan world, and he's trying to teach them to live differently. But they're still going to be in this pagan world. They're still going to have a lot of these kind of mindsets and ways of thinking, and even where clearly the New Testament, it's a kingdom, but it's not a kingdom of this world. They were a kingdom of this world, and for them to exist in a kingdom in this world, in that time, we have to understand it through that lens. Everyone that you leave alive, every person you leave alive, which you see it in the Bible narrative when God commands them to kill someone. If they don't do it, you can see that person's descendants becoming a thorn in their side. I mean, he says it over and over again. And we made the point last week. Obviously, we do not take this mindset to the New Testament and say, okay, well, let's kill our enemies then. But the mindset or the application is the idea of purging the leaven, purging the evil. We do need to keep ourselves pure. We do need to make sure there's a separation between us and the wickedness of the world. If we allow ourselves to try to, again, straddle the fence, to be friends with the world, we're going to find that will not work, and the leaven of that will affect us. So that's... Oh.
The world, the influence of a woman on man is mighty, and we know that. But we're sympathetic to them. That's too hard for them, that's too much for them, that's too whatever. And we do tend to kind of take it easy on women sometimes. And I wonder if that's what they were doing here. They're like, wait, they're just women. Let's don't treat them like this. And they're thinking, and maybe that's where they were at, and yet Moses and God are wiser than that, and they said, your influence is so mighty. I mean, I know none of those words are said, but I'm just saying, in my mind, I'm looking at this and realizing how much influence I have as a woman over a man, and the tools I can use for evil if I choose to do so. That's just something.
I think that's right, and you see this distinction basically being, are they old enough to to be culpable? Are they old enough to have been part of this decision? Yeah, I think that's part of it. Absolutely. Yeah. So the other thing we see in this chapter is the division of the spoil, the plunder. Why do they divide the plunder? What's the purpose described here? And it goes into pretty specifically how they divided it, half and half. Yes, sir. Yes, right. So half to the people who went to war, and half to the people who didn't. A share to the priest, a share to those who didn't fight. Verse 47 describes. This is something that you see God doing several times throughout the Bible narrative, where He's trying to help them to see themselves as a nation. You're not just individuals who get the spoils of the battle. You need to think about the people who stayed home. You need to think about the people who supported you. This is something David does in one of his battles, where there's a group that stays guarding the camp, and he ends up splitting the spoils with them as well. They were part of the effort, which you see in that a higher standard than the world at that time would have imposed. There's wisdom in that, in seeing yourselves as part of a team instead of just who came out on top, who was the top warrior. You're like, well, we're all part of a team. It's just interesting to see what part of my earlier comment was, realizing that the nation of Israel and all of these laws and regulations and rules, and even the rules about vows, we look at the rules about vows and we say, well, how could God do that? How could He treat men, different than women? It's like, okay, but just please understand that the world at that time gave women no value at all. The world at that time gave women no value. What God does in this is a small stepping stone toward what we get in the New Covenant, where women are described as heirs with us. They're no less than men. And that's God is again, the Old Testament is the tutor to bring us to Christ. It took the world a while to get to this point where they could understand that. Cindy, you had your hand up.
I was just going to mention that, several times in the earlier part, starting around verse 25, it talks about the fighting men that were getting the reward. It didn't say they were divided among every man, it said the fighting men.
That's right.
Specifically. And later, it did talk about the Levites getting their portion, but in the first part, when the Lord told Moses to divide it, and He specifies the fighting men.
Yes. Verse 27, the plunder into two parts between the warriors who went out to battle and all the congregation. And then the one half he describes later being given specifically to the Levites. Yep. Okay, I want to, and there may be some more thoughts about this too, but let's go to the next section here. So in chapter 32, Moses is approached by two tribes, Reuben and Gad. Somewhere in there, it's kind of interesting that all of a sudden it becomes Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh. And, I looked a few times, like, when do they jump on board? Because it's just Reuben and Gad, and then half tribe Manasseh ends up getting the same thing. So I'm not sure exactly when they came on board. Maybe they were, waiting to see what Reuben and Gad would get, or maybe they heard the interaction and then said, hey, we want that too. But basically what is being requested is, we've won some battles here. Remember, on the eastern side of the Jordan, we won some battles. They decimated these cities. These cities were laying empty. And they're looking around saying, we got good pasture land, we got everything we could want. So they go to Moses and ask, can we just live here? Can this be our inheritance? And again, as I said, the half tribe of Manasseh ends up getting part two. So I think these two maps go pretty closely together, but this ends up being, a representation of what ends up happening, where Reuben and Gad and this half tribe of Manasseh settle on the eastern side of the Jordan. So that's what they asked for. And it said, if we found favor in your sight, verse 5, Don't take us across the Jordan. So it seems a pretty reasonable request. What is Moses' reaction? Okay.
He seems to think the request is, y'all go capture and we're all gonna stay over here.
That's right. That's right. So you can see some of that beginning in verse 6. Shall your brothers go to war while you sit here? Verse 7, why will you discourage the heart of the people? Verse 6, I mean, this is pretty hard. I'm sorry, verse 8. He says, your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. Moses sees this as extremely serious. This is like when we sent the 12 spies into the land and they didn't want to go fight. And here you are saying, hey, we've already won this land. Let's stay here and we'll just wait and see what happens to you guys. You know, that's basically what Moses.
Their intention. They were worthy of the rebuke.
Yes, yes. So that's the part I feel like it's worth kicking around for a minute. You can see the reaction, I think, in Martin's comment. We understand they really quickly come back with, no, we're going to go fight with you. We're going to give us some time. We'll build pens for our sheep. We'll set up our families here, and then we'll go fight. And we're not going to come back until the fighting's done. We're not going to go back until every tribe has its inheritance. And it's possible that they hadn't thought through that, and that this is a reaction to Moses's concerns, or maybe they already had that in their mind, that that's what they were going to do, and they just hadn't framed it to Moses. But to Martin's point, I feel like it's something worth discussing, meditating on. So if Moses had been right, if that was really their reason, that they were either too scared or just not interested in helping their brethren, or Moses would have been correct to say what he said. So it makes me want to think, okay, well, was Moses right? Was he right, or was he impugning motives to them that they didn't really have? So what's everyone's thought? I know we're going to be doing some speculating here.
Given their history, what would you have thought?
Given their history, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Moses has a track record with these people.
So if you go strictly by the story here, the Lord grants them this land.
He does.
So maybe it was not the intent of their heart. Maybe Moses, like Mark pointed out, if he saw the people and understood what the people were asking for and what they had been in the past, he would do that. But also, this group or this generation of people are also the people that go over with Caleb and take them, with Joshua and take the land. When you get into the book of Joshua, it talks about Joshua and those elders, when they had passed away, then came a generation that didn't know the Lord. And these people maybe had seen what had gone on the 40 years and seemed to be a group that followed. They had their moments, just like here with the Midianites, but they still seemed to overall follow the direction of the Lord. So maybe their intent was to do right.
And I think what I'm doing here, I'm asking us to speculate. I hope you'll understand. I don't think there's a clear answer to this. I think it's worth kicking around. And I guess part of what I wanted to kick around is, let's assume for a second that Moses was impugning motives to them, that their request was coming from a pure heart, and they weren't intending to discourage the people. They were intending to help. And Moses kind of jumps down their throat almost with, well, you're doing this because of that, and you're doing this because of that. To me, there's a warning for us in that. And I say for us because I see myself doing that sometimes, where I have a track record with somebody, and they've burned me a few times, or maybe somebody else has burned me a few times, and I see this guy following a pattern that seems familiar to me, and I'm thinking, well, he's doing this because of this, this, and that. And I'll treat them that way because I'm impugning motives to them. And I think there's a warning. And in this, I kind of read this and say, I feel like the people had, like Darren just described, I feel like this was a reasonable request, that they were not trying to discourage the people, and Moses ends up reading something into it that maybe wasn't there. And I think, especially for, say this nicely, people who've been around the block, people you've lived a few years, there's a tendency to to impugn motives to people, to judge a little bit like what you're seeing from people, and maybe be a little bit too harsh, in some of our assumptions. That being said, well, go ahead, Darren. Yes, sir.
What I would say here is maybe Moses did impugn motives because of the history. But I don't see where the Lord rebukes him or
That's
his
right.
take
That's
offense.
right.
So maybe it was done to the point it wasn't sin. So.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said,
I think it's a situation, I think Moses' reaction is appropriate,
Yes, sir.
based on the information he had at the time.
That's right.
And, but you notice the people didn't seem upset that Moses responded the way he did. It's almost, well, I can see why you're thinking that.
That's right.
Let us explain some more.
That's right.
You know,
See, that's
both
what,
sides seem to understand, okay, I understand where you're coming
that's
from.
right.
Yeah.
That's what's to me is neat about this interchange.
Even if Moses was impugning motives that they didn't have, they received it well. And they,
I've been in their shoes. Well, I know why he's thinking that.
Exactly. Yeah. So they accepted his, let's call it encouragement. They accepted his concern, and they addressed his concern. This is something that we need to be able to do for one another. Where, if my brother is trying to encourage me and he's worried about me, it's like, Sam, I've seen this and I've seen that, and I feel like maybe you're getting a little bit close to the world. I feel like maybe you just might need to think about this some more. This seems like it's close to a line that I'm worried about. And so I could respond with anger. I could respond with, who are you to judge me? Or I could try to think, because there is wisdom in what Moses says. There is wisdom in his perspective. And whether they had thought about it before or not doesn't really change the way we can learn from this. Is they received that encouragement well, and they addressed the concerns. And Moses accepts that. This is the thing about Moses in this story that is really neat. He had these major concerns, and when he hears how they're going to address his concerns, whether they thought about it before or not, he accepts that. He says, this is a good plan. This will work. And I think that, especially for older folks, we need to be willing to hear people out, and we need to be willing to see the wisdom of a perspective maybe we hadn't thought about before.
Work store.
Oh, good. All right, bring it on.
We have a safety directive at work. We've just hit 1,600 days without an accident. We put some things in place, and one of the things, speaking years ago, speaking to one another about safety. If you see someone doing something unsafe, bring it up.
Yeah.
We also encourage those that are being talked to listen to things coming up. And we got this, you got to have courage to speak up, and you got to have courage to listen.
There you go.
And, both of those are hard to do.
It is.
Especially, when you're thinking about spiritual things. It applies, to spiritual things. You have to have the courage to be able to speak to someone in a loving manner to express your concerns.
That's right.
And when someone talks to you, you've got to have the courage and willingness to listen, because they're doing it because they care.
Absolutely.
It's not easy.
Absolutely.
On either side, it's not easy.
That's
But
really,
it has to be approached in the right manner.
that's right.
Piggybacking off of all that, because I think that's kind of exactly the points I was hoping that we could see. Have you ever been approached by somebody with concerns, and when you first hear them, you're thinking, well, they're judging me, they're impugning motives to me. I was already planning to do that. But also, have you not been approached sometimes with people's concerns and like, ooh, that's a good concern. I hadn't thought about that. I'm glad they said something. I've been on both sides of that. I've also been on the other side where Frankie's describing, where you feel like something needs to be said,
feel like something needs to be said. I'm worried. Maybe their heart's right. Maybe they're seeing the pitfall, but I feel like something needs to be said. And I've been on both sides of that, where sometimes I convinced myself not to say anything. And sometimes I had the courage to say what I felt like needed to be said. And these are the kinds of situations we need to be thinking about. And to Frankie's point, when we're talking about spiritual things, let's go ahead and say it. Let's go ahead and say it. Our souls are too valuable. Our brethren's souls are too valuable. Maybe you say something that doesn't need to be said, and that's fine. But you can still have the conversation. Maybe you end up saving somebody's soul because you were willing. And again, from the way this story is framed, I don't think we really know whether Moses' concerns were something they had thought about or not. But they end up addressing his concerns in a good way. To me, it's just a neat pattern. It's a really powerful thing.
To Reuben, Gad, and I'm assuming half the tribe of Manasseh make this commitment.
That's right.
And fast forward, what most people say is roughly 7 years. In this conquest of the land, most indications is roughly 7 years. So 7 years later, they've been fighting with their brothers and all. You don't get one mention of this until at the end, the last verse of Joshua 21 says that the Lord had given them everything that was promised. So you would think you would get, at some point you would get Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh folks came and said, hey, can we go back? Can we go back?
Yeah.
The first time it's brought up, Joshua brings it up. After all the land's divided, Joshua approaches the leaders of these cities and says, okay, we're good, you can go. And they say, thanks, and they go.
Yeah.
They never even mention going back until Joshua says, okay, you've kept your promise, you've kept your commitment, y'all can go back. That's in Joshua 22. And they said, thanks. He just said, go back, but keep the commandments, etc. And they said, thanks, and they head back.
Yep.
They fully kept this promise, even to the point that Joshua has to come to them and say, okay, you're good, you can go.
Well, in this chapter even,
You can see, in addition to bringing up his concerns and then listening to their response and accepting their response, Moses tacks on a warning at the end. He says, this is good. If you do what you're saying, that's fine. But just be aware, hey, if you're lying to me, if you're misleading me, or if you don't follow through with what you're saying, look what he says in verse 23, your sins will find you out. And this is the other side. When we're having conversations with one another, let's try to assume the best. Let's try to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's be willing to say the hard things, to Frankie's point, because sometimes the hard things need to be said. And I can't always know from reading somebody else whether it needs to be said or not. That's appropriate to go ahead and say what you feel like needs to be said. And even a warning like this is like, hey, I've heard what you've said, and I love you, and I really, I want to believe the best in you, and I'm gonna keep, treating you like a brother. But if you're misleading me, if what you've told me is not true, your sins are going to find you out. It's between you and God. I've said my piece, and that's appropriate too. That's appropriate too. Those are hard conversations. Yes, ma'am.
Didn't follow through, Moses wouldn't know about it because it would be after his death. So he sort of makes them accountable to the next generation.
That's right. That's right.
Although
Great
I'm
point.
confident Joshua's very aware of this arrangement.
Yes, but no, to all of your points, absolutely. So that's right. We're going to see that. Yeah. So you can see them down in verse 31. Reuben, or the people of Gad, people of Reuben said, what the Lord has said your servants, we will do. Verse 31. And then all of a sudden, verse 33, Gad, Reuben, and the half tribe of Manasseh. So again, when did they come on board? Like, let's see what Moses says to them, and then we'll ask for our half. We don't know. It's interesting to think about. But the chapter ends with them building cities and even renaming cities. But that's an interesting example, I think, of the scriptures are kind of fast forwarding, because they didn't have time to build cities before they go conquer the land. So the scriptures are fast forwarding, listing names of cities that were going to be built in the future, obviously long before that takes place.
How quickly the people are come back and we're like, no, this is not what we meant. And also that there's no argument or disrespect to Moses for thinking that.
Yes, absolutely, Rachel. I see that as being definitely lessons we should take as well. Absolutely. All right. Again, in the interest of time and trying to bring Numbers to a close, chapters 33, 34, 35, you can scan it, skim it. It's just a recounting of where they camped along the way. Some time clues are given as far as how long they were in certain places, but not many time clues. And this is the chapter where we see Aaron's death, verse 38, and the time clue there. So it's just interesting. I didn't have a lot to add there. You do see the warning down in verse 50. This is 33:50, where Moses gives them this warning. And of course, it's the Lord giving the warning through Moses. Speak to the people of Israel, say to them, when you pass over the Jordan in the land of Canaan, which again, to Jane's point, Moses knows he's preparing them for this because it won't be him. He says, then you shall drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you and destroy all their figured stones, destroy all the metal images and demolish all their high places, and you shall take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to inherit it. Verse 55, but if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, then those of them who you let remain shall be barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side. They shall trouble you in the land where you dwell, and I will do this to you as I thought to do to them. So this kind of, to me, goes full circle back to, well, why did they have to kill all the people of Midian? Fast forward, why are they supposed to kill all the inhabitants of the land? Well, remember, they're building a physical nation. They are dispossessing physical nations, and any that you let remain, they're going to be thorns in your side. And that. Yeah, there is both, but there's certain times where he tells them to completely annihilate. Yeah. Yeah. God's judgment is obviously a part of that. Yeah, and he's determined that their iniquity was complete.
Other people fights out of but he does, I think, do that sense of justice here. That part of the driving out was God's ultimate punishment for them for finding an idolatry. When some like Midianites had priests, Jethro, for example, but then he says, if you get wrapped up in that idolatry, you're going to get the same kind of punishment. And we see that when Israel gets killed because of their idolatry.
Absolutely.
So God's even in his justice.
He's laid it out. He's laid out all the warnings, and it's almost like the warnings end up being a prediction of exactly what's going to happen, because they fall right into all of the problems that he warned them about. All right, so we're going to move on out of Numbers now, start talking about Deuteronomy. Again, we've framed Deuteronomy. Think about that as Moses' farewell reach to the people. He knows he's about to depart. He's thinking about them. What's going to happen after my departure? It's such a great thing to remember with all of this. For next week, if you would, you can read our workbook. The workbook kind of goes over all of Deuteronomy at once. So read through that, and then also we're specifically going to try to do chapters 1 through 4. I think 1 through 4 is more of the historical review and the narrative, and then beyond that, the last half of Deuteronomy, last 3/4, is really more of his speeches. So we'll try to do the chapters 1 through 4 first, and then kind of sum up his speeches with another class. Chapters 1 through 4 next week.